I'm Frances Arnold from Caltech. I co-chair PCAST with Professor Maria Zuber and Dr. Arthi Prabhakar, the President's Science Advisor and co-chair of PCAST. And I'd like to welcome all the members of PCAST and those members of the public who are watching today. Reminder that the meeting is being live streamed to the public. It's being recorded, and the recording of this session will be available by next week on the PCAST website. It turns out that people are very spread out today, so I thank members and speakers who are joining from the West Coast, even Hawaii, and they're joining so early. I also thank those participants in Europe who are staying up late. I think Zoom is fantastic, but it does not solve the time zone problem. So today we have two sessions on the future of research, and this is a topic that PCAST started exploring in the May meeting. Times are changing, my friends, and research is changing. Anyone watching online who did not observe the May meeting can watch the discussions we had then on the national purpose of research and on emerging research models at universities. Those were recorded and they're available on the PCAST website. It's a great channel. Be sure to check it out. And today, our first session will explore opportunities and challenges of research that's explicitly directed towards societal impact. After that session, we take a short break and then transition to an exciting discussion and vote on PCAST's latest product, a letter to the president entitled Expanding STEM Talent in the Federal Workforce. After a break for lunch, we'll return to exploring the future of research, this time with a session that looks at how a small selection of innovative young researchers are probing new horizons. Maria, would you like to add something to the welcome?
Well, I'd like to add my welcome to PCAST and the general public. I thank everybody for tuning in, and I'm excited to get to the first session. So I'd just like to express PCAST's congratulations to you, Frances. You've just been awarded the recipient of the Priestley Medal, the highest honor given by the American Chemical Society for distinguished service in chemistry. So Frances, congratulations, and I'll turn it back to you to kick off the first session.
Oh gosh, thank you for that, Maria. This is, we could spend all the PCAST time listing all the awards that our members win, so I'm grateful that you mentioned that, but everybody here is really wonderful for devoting their time to looking at important problems in science and technology. So what I want to do now is move us into the first session where we have an overview of the topic, which will be research with societal impacts. As we discussed in May, one trend we're seeing is an increase in research that seeks to address societal challenges. Of course, many of us think that our research addresses such challenges, but here for this session, we've chosen some people whose work has a very direct impact on communities. We'd like to explore some of the opportunities and challenges that those researchers face. Now, what we've done is ask the panelists to provide very brief remarks, only up to 7 minutes each, so that we'll have time for an animated discussion after their presentations. We want to explore what it's like to be a researcher across disciplines and trying to reach communities directly. So during the panel presentations, we ask all other virtual participants, keep your videos off. And then once the presentations stop, please turn those back on so that we can have a good discussion. And please raise your hand with the Zoom function. So now I'll introduce our three speakers who've kindly agreed to join us. And there's longer biographical information available on the PCAST website and in the members' agenda books. But our first is Jola Ajibade of Emory University. Jola explores how climate change impacts are transforming the lives, livelihoods, social cultural landscapes, and housing access for historically marginalized communities. Our second speaker, Amy McGovern of the University of Oklahoma, is a national leader in the field of AI for weather, and she demonstrates how AI can be used to predict high-impact weather events. Finally, Dawn Wright of the Environmental Systems Research Institute is a celebrated oceanographer and geographer known for her pioneering work with geographic information system technology for a myriad of applications, including seafloor mapping and environmental conservation. Dr. Ajibade, would you please start?
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I want to thank the members of PCAST for inviting me. It's such an honor. And I have 5 minutes to run through this. So what I want to talk about today, it's really about convergence research as the bedrock for advancing climate change resilience. If we're going to build resilience to climate change, we need multiple perspectives, multiple expertise, certainly multiple methods. There is no single disciplinary approach that could help us address any of the issue. For instance, right now we're going through a massive heat wave across the nation. Not one single discipline can help address this issue. And so the idea of convergence research is really to bring together people from the social sciences, in the humanities, in STEM, engineering, biology, physics, chemistry. All of us need to be together to begin to work on innovative solutions that have social impact, that would translate to meaningful change for society in health, in environment, and certainly with climate change as well. You can advance the slide, please. Yes, so my key message is to just talk about the fact that social impacts would require convergence research, as I've mentioned earlier. But one of the important things is also epistemic inequalities. I've been seeing a lot of interdisciplinary research. So if we're going to do convergence science, we need to do it in a way that really doesn't prioritize particular discipline, especially the natural sciences, but really respecting everyone who will be coming together to address the bigger issues I'm going to be talking about today. And I also want to mention that data cannot or does not change things. It's people who do. When we bring together people to advocate for policy change, that's when you begin to see changes. Data themselves do not change anything. And as we're seeing the escalation of AI, which can be helpful, we also must be mindful that AI cannot save us. We need to begin to think about ways to change ourselves as a society so we can move forward in addressing the issues that is important to us. Our climate is changing, but we also need to change to begin to meet the important challenges ahead of us or that we're currently experiencing. Advance the slide, please. Yes, and so as I framed the question, I framed it in 3 ways, just advance all 3. So the key things I'm going to be addressing today is, can you please advance? Oh, there were things that were missing there. Okay, you can go back. There were 3 questions that I think were not loaded. So the first question that is, why is siloed research a problem? That's what that X was supposed to be showing. I'm not sure why it's not showing on that hand. And then the second question is, how do you do convergence research? Even if you want to do it, how do you do it? And the third thing is, how do you gauge the impact of your research? If you're doing convergence research, how do you really gauge that it's making a difference? So those are the 3 questions. Move further the slides, please. So why is siloed issue, a siloed science a problem? If you think about the history of science itself, whether you're going back to Francis Bacon, Auguste Comte, all of these other people, John Stuart Mill, it's very much rooted in the idea that empiricist idea, logical positivist, and also utilitarian solutions are the ways in which you can address problems in society. But we know that's not true. We know there are diverse ways of addressing problems in society, and we need to bring together multiple perspective, pragmatist philosophy, as well as social constructionist philosophy. All of this philosophy needs to come together in thinking about solutions. And so when you prioritize particular ways of knowing, especially in the ways in which we've done historically, not only in the US, but globally, we begin to see the hierarchical way in which knowledge has been implemented over society. And it's often Eurocentric, right? You have this universalist so-called neutral knowledge and objective knowledge, which isn't true. And in doing that, we've also seen that that sort of knowledge production system has maintained this wide frame that normalizes racial inequality and, quite frankly, racial superiority in ways in which we do science. And that's problematic. And suddenly, those types of knowledges are often just good at armoring data without necessarily translating the kinds of change that really matters in society. Please advance. And so The key thing to bear in mind is science is very much rooted in power relations. It's very much rooted in a social context, like many other ways of doing or of knowing the world. And so if we do not acknowledge the knowledge production in science and the power that has been in particular ways of which we've done science, we will fail to democratize decision-making. We will also fail at reducing inequality in society, which is important in addressing climate change as well. And so it's important to begin to think about this intersection of decision-making, the social context of the decision we're making, but also at reducing inequality in society. Advance, please. Yes. And so when you think about climate change, whether you're thinking about it from a resilience perspective, from other perspective, the key thing is to realize that climate change, people bring together multiple ways of thinking, right? There are people who think about climate change as an energy justice issue, or as a social justice issue, or as a housing issue, or as a market issue. But when we're prioritizing only the earth sciences and we're thinking about climate change as a greenhouse gas issue only, we miss out on a whole lot of perspective that is important into addressing climate change. And that's why the siloed problem or siloed research, like I mentioned, is problematic. Advance, please. And so, but how do we do convergence research, right? We've seen that unilateral science is problematic, and also multidisciplinary science, where you still have the silo ways of doing things, doesn't really work. So if you look at the last image here, we're thinking about transdisciplinary science, which is also very much similar to convergence research, where we're digging deeper into relationship with one another in learning, in expertise, in methodology, in also the breadth of the work we're doing, and in the integration of knowledge. So this is just a pictorial dimension of how we could do convergent science, bringing multiple perspectives together from STEM to humanities, certainly to social sciences as well. But going beyond this, advance the slide, please. Going beyond what it would look like structurally, it's also important to think about what it means in terms of the social processes that matters, right? So in terms of the social processes that matters, we have to begin to think about the structural biases that has been built into knowledge productions over centuries, quite frankly. And also the people that have been marginalized in STEM, the Black, the brown people, the people of color generally, that have often not had a voice and often not had the resources and support to really thrive in STEM. And so to begin to do convergence research requires us to bring those voices and these people together, which includes myself in any case. So diversity and inclusion in STEM will be important to advancing convergent science. But also when we think about colonial relations that has been in knowledge production, and we really want to do a meaningful convergence research, we also need to decenter coloniality. We need to think of ways to embrace very disruptive approach. You know, the ways in which things have been done seem to not only siloed, but it's based on particular ways of knowing, and disrupting that intentionally will be key to us advancing and making change in society. Advance, please. And another key issue is also funding. Globally, and certainly in the US, there's a lot of funding going to natural sciences and technical sciences, and very little going to social science. I know that is changing, but we need to continue to invest in social sciences, because that's where we're going to have solutions. We need to put our money where the solutions will be. If the science, or if the data that is from the natural sciences would change climate change, things would have changed. Things would have been transformed. We already know what the data is telling us, that the climate is changing unequivocally. It's because people, when it comes to making the policy, we're not seeing the kind of changes we need to see. And so that's why investing in social sciences that also allow us to think about the psychology of the problem and how we need to bring together a variety of people will be key. So putting our money where the change needs to happen is key. Advance, please. Yes, I just want to quickly talk about an example of a convergent science that I did with a group of people, where we also centered residents, experts. In this case, we're trying to understand, how do we bring together equitable resilience, or how do we do equitable resilience in addressing cascading climate-related disasters? And in this case, we're focusing on air pollution, heat wave, ice storm as well, and also looking at heat-related deaths. As many of you know, heat kills more people than any other disasters that has been happening in the US, and certainly maybe in many parts of the world as well. But how do we begin to think about the different disasters that's happening in ways that we're not looking at them in a silo form, but also looking at how they're affecting communities and bringing the community voices into the solution set? And that's what we try to do in this work, where we prioritize communities' perspective, but also look at the social vulnerability and and baseline resilience factors that make certain people vulnerable to climate change more severely than others, and what makes particular people resilient. And in doing this work, we brought together communities, we brought together multiple experts, but also brought together policymakers, engaging them in the findings of the research we've done and trying to translate that into meaningful policies for change. And lastly, this is my last slide. I just want to also talk about the fact that when we spoke to people, a lot of them didn't have a trust in government. They really want changes from government, but we haven't seen a lot of the change they wanted. And so they were worried about, even at the federal level and the local level, the fact that we may see social security being taken away, food stamp being taken away, which people need during a disaster, but also during normal times. If you advance very quickly, please. And also they talked about having people work together to begin to address solutions. They do not think that the climate problems will be addressed only by the government. And the final slide will be, and just one more slide. I'll just wrap up with this last slide. This last slide talks about another ways of gauging impact. This was a research that was done by a researcher at Arizona University, where they were able to map it in Maricopa County. And they noticed that there were a number of hotspots in those counties where mobile homes were actually places where a lot of people were living, and those mobile homes were trapping heat. But one of the problems why people were dying there were also because the landlord had denied tenants from installing air conditioning. And so Patricia Solis was able to work with community-based organizations and also work with policymakers in Arizona, and they were able to pass a bill that allowed for translating these issues into policy, where now landlords cannot deny tenants the opportunity to be able to install life-saving air conditioning and other life-saving installations.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry, we need to move on.
Yes,
okay.
That's my last slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Dr. McGovern?
All right. So I'm Amy McGovern. I'm a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and I'm in the School of Meteorology and the School of Computer Science. And I'm also the director for the NSF AI Institute for Research on Trustworthy AI, Weather, Climate, and Coastal Oceanography. And that's where I'm going to talk about the applications of research for societal impact. We're going to talk about AI for weather and climate. You can go to the next slide. We're going to start with the societal impact just of weather in general. This is the NOAA collects information on all the billion-dollar weather disasters, and these are the billion-dollar weather disasters from last year. And what you can see is there are a tremendous number of them. I'm gonna, just for fun and to give you a demo, zoom in if you go to the next animation on something. So that's a picture of my hand holding some hail that's actually at my house. This is me holding up, I'm hoping you all can see it. This is me holding up a replica hailstone to show you where all this hail and how this hail has societal impact. This is a 3D printed hailstone that I understand is sitting somewhere inside OSTP. Somebody got a copy of it. That is it was a 3-pound stone that fell. It's about 5, I don't know if you can tell how big it is. It was about 5 inches across. Imagine that thing falling down. We're not going to be able to stop hail, but what can we do with AI is we can be able to better predict hail and therefore be able to have a tremendous societal impact on helping. For example, hail isn't the only thing we're doing, but being able to improve our predictions of all of these events. Last year alone, you can see how many severe weather-related disasters there were. Next slide. So just starting with, what's in our name, and I'm going to talk more about AI to ES in just a second, but, why do we need trustworthy AI for weather and climate, and why are we looking at societal impacts? Trustworthy AI specifically is going to be providing us timely, reliable, and actionable information to the decision makers that are actually making decisions about the weather and the climate. And we're doing this to improve weather prediction at all timescales. And by all timescales, I mean we're improving our prediction about events like this giant hail, which happened on the timescale of an hour, versus looking all the way out at the climate. We want to be able to use AI to improve prediction at all scales. We can save lives, we can save property and crops, and we can provide personalized risk management because people will be able to get a forecast that matters to them and overall improve climate resiliency as a society. Next slide. That one took a second to fade in. So what I'm going to talk about briefly is what we're doing in our AI Institute. So this is we are AI2ES is our short name. We're the NSF AI Institute for Research in Trustworthy AI and Weather, Climate, and Coastal Oceanography. We were funded in the first round of AI Institutes in 2020. So we're just about to start our 5th year in September. And what AI2ES is doing is we're developing novel, physically based, meaning based in the laws of physics, AI techniques that are demonstrated to be trustworthy. And what that means is we're working on understanding the nature of trust in AI by our end users so that what we develop is actually trustworthy. And we're focused on improving prediction, understanding, and communication of high impact weather, all focused on improving our climate resiliency. AI2S, I love the discussion on the last slide about convergence. I actually, without knowing that, have convergence on my next slide, but you don't have to go there yet. AI2S, AI2S is a large group of people that are working together. So this slide shows you all of the universities that are working on AI2S. The top line is all the universities. The second line is all the private industry partners that we have. And then the bottom line are our government and federally funded research collaborators. Now you can go to the next slide. So just to give you an overview of how we're doing this, and I love that you just had a whole 10-slide overview of convergence research, because convergence research is right there without me knowing it. What we do, the first part of what we do is what I'm going to focus on today, since I didn't get very much time, is that we do trustworthy AI and development of the trustworthy AI, which AI scientists that are directly working with the next circle, which is atmospheric and ocean scientists, and then directly working with social scientists. And the social scientists that we focus on are risk communication scientists. When you put that together, we're all working together synergistically and doing convergence research. We're truly doing integration across disciplines to make a better, more novel outcome. We also have a significant component of broadening participation in workforce development, because I got a limited number of slides. I didn't choose to talk about that in the slides, but I can answer questions about it. That also go with partnerships, and that all ties together to make us community integration. And then I want to emphasize that circle that goes all the way around what we do, because everything we do is intended to be, it is always ethical, responsible AI, and also use inspired. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to do a quick overview of each one of those three circles. So the quick overview of the AI circle is that AI for Earth science really has different needs than the traditional AI, like where you're traditionally learning on something like ImageNet, where you're looking at images of sunsets and trees. Earth science and Earth systems really need you to be able to do physics-based AI, to understand the spatial-temporal context of what you're doing, because it's highly spatio-temporal autocorrelated. And it's also used in life and death decision-making, which is not the case for most of the tasks that you're doing with ImageNet, for example. And so that makes different needs for the trustworthy part of the AI. And the little bricks that are over here on the side are the things that we're working, foundational topics in AI that we're working on: generative AI, physics-based AI. I don't have time to talk about all those. I will do it in the questions if people want to dive in deeper. I just wanted you to have an idea of where we were going. Next slide. I wanted to show you the use-inspired nature of what we're doing. The goal of what we're doing, in addition to developing those foundational AI methods, is to use the AI methods to enhance our understanding of the basic processes in different environmental science or Earth system science domains. And the domains that we're looking at, you might have guessed: convective weather. That means thunderstorms, based on the fact that I showed you hail, but we have a lot more. I didn't bring any winter storms with me, but because that would be a little impossible. But winter weather is another one that we're looking at. Tropical cyclones, or hurricanes as we call them in the United States, looking at subseasonal prediction, and then a variety of coastal oceanography applications, including fogging and saving sea turtles. Next slide. And the third circle that is key in making this a convergence research is that we have social scientists who are working with us directly, with our end users and with our AI researchers and with our atmospheric scientists, to try to understand what it means to make the AI trustworthy. And so they're performing interviews with our end users. And for the first round of AI2ES, our end users are primarily professional end users from the different government agencies that are listed there under decision makers. So our interviews have been with the National Weather Service, with emergency management, with FEMA, et cetera. And they do these interviews with actual techniques that we've developed, and they understand why something will be trusted, why something isn't trusted, and what we need to do to adjust our methods, so that we're really having that synergistic circle. Next slide. Before I end, I wanted to, we were told to talk about some of the ways in which research is changing. And this is one of the ways that I think you probably know if you've paid attention to AI, but you maybe not know if you're not looking at AI for weather very specifically. And what this graph is, the way that AI for weather is changing over the last few years. We are sitting right on the cusp of a revolution in AI for weather. And one of the things that's really interesting about this revolution is it's not being driven by academia. It's being driven by private industry. And so that slide, that circle up there, is showing you all the recent papers that are above the current best skill out there, and they're all being developed by private industry. And Francis, I see you. The next slide is the last slide. So I just want to end by saying that AI for weather is transformational, and I would really like to talk about how we can make a multi-agency, multi-sector transdisciplinary center. It's something that PCAST has talked about in the past. They issued a report on, but it hasn't actually been made a reality. And we really need to make a new kind of partnership that can have academia, government, and private industry working together very quickly. And I'll end there.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to Dr. Wright.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to share my screen. So I'm also extremely pleased and honored to be here, especially from the standpoint of someone who is in private industry right now. And I want to start with the premise, similar to Jola, that geography is the ultimate interdisciplinary endeavor, the science of which, in my view, often follows the mandate of use-inspired science, as Amy has just explained to us, which assists in solving the world's biggest problems, as seen on this slide. And as all of you know better than anyone, addressing these issues with equitable solutions is going to be challenging for all of us, probably for the rest of our lives. Now, one major solution that drives our research at Esri is the geographic approach, which is a way of thinking and problem solving that integrates and supports powerful digital methodologies, such as geoanalytics for creating insights and understanding through spatial data science and AI, geovisualization, a language through maps and visualization for communicating the content and the context of our world, geodesign, a scenario building for creating sustainable and inclusive futures, including via digital twins, geocollaboration for engaging as many communities as possible, and geoaccounting to account for all the factors while setting up balanced measures driven by shared values. So in our Esri research, we aim this geographic approach at the global geospatial framework that's now emerging, involving a host of globally interconnected sensors and data sets, including for weather, and with thousands of organizations seeking to share their data sets and services, especially by way of Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. And why? Because spatial is special. Spatial lies at the heart of just about everything that matters to us, such as where to address hotspots of ocean overheating, of poor ocean health, of threatened biodiversity, where are climate hazards forcing people to live, work, and shop, where to ensure resilient fresh water supplies. Speaking of water, here's an example along the lines of geoanalytics and a geoaccounting of global water. Esri is a leading industry partner in this Group on Earth Observations Global Water Sustainability, or GeoGLOS, partnership that has created a global stream flow forecast. We've also been in very close collaboration with Brigham Young. Let's see, now something has happened here where I can no longer control my slides. So there we go. Something happened there in Zoom. Okay, so we've also been in very close collaboration with Brigham Young University on this work since 2017. In fact, please ask me in the question and answer period about our non-traditional collaboration program with universities, as well as with nonprofits and governments, especially along the lines of Marcia McNutt's comments in her National Academy State of the Science address last month on the great need to modernize public-private partnerships. Now, GeoGLOS provides a global geoaccounting of fresh water. This map is real. The stream segments here are live. GeoGLOS currently provides up to 10 days of forecasting for 7 million stream reaches globally, and that is up from 1 million reaches previously. And these stream forecasts and map services are used by local to national governments and other organizations to mitigate risks, such as southern Brazil's worst flooding in 80 years in May that displaced over 500,000 people. These services are also used in irrigation planning for agriculture, hydroelectric dam management, transportation logistics, and commerce for cargo barges and ferries, recreation planning for tour boats, paddle sports, fishing, and much more. Now, GeoGLOS delivers actionable data and web services on a daily and weekly basis for free to places where little to no resources exist. And especially on the right part of the slide, this can also empower locally adaptable open source code and web applications, thereby filling important data gaps to strengthen those water resilience efforts. This in turn feeds back into the hydrologic data science on the left side of the slide that will go into the next version of GeoGLOS. Now, on a geovisualization, geocollaboration, and geoanalytics front, in the US, as it advances ambitious climate action plans, powered by massive legislation. Esri has been proud to partner with the White House, together with NOAA, NASA, the Departments of the Interior and of Energy, and the U.S. Global Change Research Program to develop the Climate Mapping for Resilience and Adaptation portal that can be leveraged for all the needs that you see on this slide. And among many things, our use-inspired research here has produced a dashboard of maps and statistics to visualize what is happening in terms of real-time risk to people, property, and infrastructure for wildfire, for coastal and inland flooding, for extreme heat, and for drought, or what the future exposure will be within a location of interest based on either low or high emission scenarios. And in this portal, these maps also calculate and help the user to write a proposal to understand if a community is eligible for priority federal funding through Justice 40 to ensure that 40% of funding does indeed go to communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by population. So that's an idea, that's a snapshot of the research that we are doing at Esri. We have a portal here with information on all of our projects, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. So if all the members would turn on their cameras, and Dr. Wright, please turn on your camera as well. We'll have a good discussion, which I will start off. I'll take my prerogative as chair, and I'll go back to Dr. Ajibade. You talk about convergence research, but I didn't see how you interact with scientists, right? So how does the science come into your work? I understand that you interact with people, and that's an important bridge, but tell us how you interact with science and scientists.
Thank you so much. And I apologize. I cut a lot of things off my slides. So this work the one that I showed about the work we did with residents expert as well, it actually started with scientists at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I was working with James Doan and a couple of other people at NCA to decide on what were the climatic factors and drivers of some of the events I mentioned, like the air pollution, the heat wave, and the wildfires. And so we collected a whole lot of climate data dating back to 1940s up onto 2021 to see the changes in the atmospheric context. And we also collected purple air data. We collected data from the DEQ, that's the Department of Environmental Quality in Oregon, to see what was happening on the air pollution side, and also collected data on ice storm. And so all of this were different things I presented at a different conference, but I didn't show them here. So we have a group of scientists that we're working with to help us understand the science part of this issue. But then beyond the science, we also wanted to translate to understand what was happening in terms of social vulnerability and resilience to the issue on the human side. So there were multiple sides, and then there was the communication to the policymakers, and then back again to the community engaged meetings that we organized to kind of communicate our findings back to community. So we had like a triangular form of research that we did that involved multiple groups, but I apologize that was not included in this slide.
Thank you. I think what we're trying to do is highlight what this convergence really, how far, from the spectrum, from the fundamental science all the way to the people is. And so I want to make sure that you get a chance to explain that. All right, John DeBerry.
Thanks, Francis, and thanks to all three speakers for great presentations. My question's for Amy. I wondered if you could give us some thoughts on the idea of private industry leadership in AI. You showed a chart illustrating very clearly how they're leading in weather forecasting. So I'm wondering how you're finding academia can contribute meaningfully and provide some unique perspective that industry can't on problems like weather forecasting or more broadly in this space.
So we've talked about that very question a lot inside AI2S because we're fortunate to have a decent amount of funding to work on exactly that question, right? How can we develop those novel AI methods? And I would say academia contributes the risk, I'm going to say risk-free because academia is not risk-free, but less risky than industry, right? Because they're always trying to make their quarterly deadlines of what they're trying to explain to their shareholders. So we can explore a little bit more in terms of the methods. But what we're falling short on is that we don't have the computational power to do these large-scale methods that are being developed by Google and Microsoft and the other large companies. And so part of why I was calling for these partnerships is we need to find a way where we can have the academic minds and the grad students exploring these ideas, seeing whether something's going to work, but be able to actually launch that method and train it. And most universities can't do that. I mean, we have some amount of supercomputing power that's funded by NSF, right? But that isn't certainly not an equitable solution across universities as a whole. And anything we have at a university does not look like anything that's happening at companies. I actually worked for Google as a visiting scientist for a couple of years, and my first day there was just shocked by how much computing power they have, right? And I think that's the trade-off I see is we have the risk ability to do something, but we don't have the computing power.
So if you could pick one way to move that needle, what would it be? Is it a supercomputer at Oklahoma as opposed to the NSF resources, or some other sort of a public-private partnership? What would you like to see?
I don't think that's the right answer. I don't think giving the universities the supercomputer. I mean, we need to have our needs for having supercomputers, and probably the supercomputing people, if they see this, are going to be upset at me for saying that. But I actually think the better, more green answer is to have better access to the resources that exist at the industry, and to have those partnerships happening, right? So that we could actually truly make a partnership. The other thing that happens between academia and industry is our timescales are very different. We have an interesting idea. We submit an application, and a year later we might get funding, and by then industry has moved on tremendously. If we could find a way to better align that so that we could actually, oh, here's this cool idea, I'm going to put a grad student, we're going to work on this project together, we're going to be able to do these computing resources, and now we can publish that paper, which is another thing that becomes a problem at industry, right? If we can find a way to align those incentives so that we can do the development in a quick way, but allow the grad students to explore things at grad student time, I think that would go a long way.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Andrea Goldsmith.
Thanks to all three presenters for a really inspiring and insightful set of presentations. My question is primarily for Amy McGovern, but the other speakers could also weigh in, and it's really around this notion of physics-based AI, because it goes beyond just climate. In fact, all engineering and a lot of science could benefit from physics-based AI. But what that actually means, and how to get AI to learn the laws of physics and then come up with the right answers is elusive, I believe. And so I wanted to understand how you are developing AI tools that are physics-based. What are the pitfalls? How does the AI tool know when it's violating the laws of physics, and other questions of that nature?
Those are excellent questions, and you're right that the word physics-based AI is used a little bit loosely by a lot of people, and it's sort of a general category. There are certainly a lot of pitfalls. You can't just put the laws of physics into the loss functions, because it tends to make the AI methods go unstable. A lot of what we're doing is trying to put in some amount of constraints, and then within some amount of reasonableness, so that you can't violate. For example, you can't go below absolute zero. That seems like something that should just be obvious, but the AI methods don't know that. And then we're doing verification of the methods sort of backwards after you've learned a lot from the data, so the data-driven approach, but then trying to do XAI and other methods to see what it's learned. Can you give it things that are outside of what it trained on, and how crazy does it go, right? Because I have actually seen AI go really badly crazy when you give it data that's outside of its training regime. So what can you do to help constrain it so it gives you a better answer in those cases? And that's all closely linked to trust, by the way, because the NWP methods, the numerical weather processing methods that exist right now, are all based on the laws of physics. They're all parameterizing the laws of physics, which gets me to another part of the answer, which is that AI can also be used to help with those parameterizations, which is a hybrid way to try to address that, where you take the NWP models and you can use AI to replace pieces of the parameterization and get you a faster NWP model while you're still following those laws of physics, because you're just focusing on that particular equation. There's probably more I could say, but I'm trying to let the others have a chance too.
Yeah. Dr. Wright, did you want to add?
Yes, I'll just say, since I represent private industry, and I work for a company that is indeed privately funded, so we don't have stakeholders. Our stakeholders are our users, and because we're working with geographic information, we are working mainly with generative AI, so not physics-based AI, and we're actually training our own large language models in terms of the types of queries and workflows that people are going to need to use when they put geographic data into our software. So our major focus on AI right now is in the area of assistants or co-pilots, agents, as people search for or try to find or create or analyze or generate geographic map products. So the physics part is really not part of what we're working on right now, but there's still the situation of that type of AI that is not biased. It gets really to Jola's comments in terms of who is training these models, who are the humans who are training the models, interpreting the data that go into these models, and then interpreting at what stage these models are going to be used in terms of how we share, because we share not only data, but we share the trained deep learning and machine learning models so that others can reproduce with similar types of data. So it's a very, very interesting dynamic going on. Jola?
I will add, I'm not an AI person, but I do appreciate the comments from both speakers. And certainly, Dawn, you're right. It's not only about who is, being trained on this data, it's also the knowledge that we are training the data on. What are the different knowledges that are out there currently? And are they really knowledges that encompasses all the variety of ways of knowing, all the varieties of experiences of people, which knowledge dominates the particular data that this AI had been trained upon. And so that's the kinds of things that I think about, but I honestly don't know how AI works in terms of the techniques of it, but I do appreciate the comments from both speakers.
But PCAST has been doing a lot of thinking about AI. Is there anybody, Jennifer, did you want to add something on that topic? Is there anybody from the AI working group that would like to chime in here?
Yeah, I was co-chair of the working group, and we identified several areas where we thought the title of the report was Supercharging Our Research, really for the benefit of society. And we outlined a few areas of where we have been using AI and where we will be using AI in the future. And I'm not going to outline those, but I will say that some of the recommendations were we need to train our workforce to be responsible in our use of AI. Use AI to democratize our resources and our research, as the NAIR pilot program is doing, and we fully supported that. And I guess I'll say that one thing that we did point out in there when we talk about physics for the future, and Sal, you can add in here that, or Eric, we don't want to take out all of the hallucinations. We wanted to monitor them because they may be creative steps. But I think that summarizes some of it. Eric, you'd like to say something, or Saul?
That was a good summary, Laura.
Okay, great. Maria.
Yeah, thanks for these three presentations. So I have two questions here, one for Amy and one for Don. So Amy, just another clarification on the models. To what extent is the better performance by industry just the fact that they have better compute power versus the different methodologies they're using, physics-based plus AI or going fully machine learning? To what extent is it methodology versus just compute power?
I think those two are intertwined to the point where it's hard to answer that question, because they can train models that aren't really doable at most universities, because they're training large data-driven models. And the models, by the way, that you're talking about at industry that were on that graph, none of them have physics embedded in them. That's something more that's happening at academia, where we're trying to work on how to do that. They're just doing pure data-driven models, but they're doing huge models that no one else can train because they're very large models.
No, but you did answer my question, that the fact that they're all using ML models. So
they are all pure AI models.
Great,
well,
thanks.
Along those lines, how critical is it to keep the physics in there? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's a really excellent question. I think most of our end users think that you should keep some amount of physics in there. There is definitely an ongoing argument right now about whether or not the AI can learn the physics just from the data. Based on our interactions with all of our interviews with our end users, they still want to ensure that the laws of physics are in there in order to make sure that it's trustworthy. If you're gonna base your forecast on something, you want to make sure that you that there's physics still in there. It doesn't necessarily need to be all of the Navier-Stokes equations, for example, but you need to not just do pure data-driven AI, because the response we get from the forecasters is, how in the world do you have any understanding that it's doing the right thing in a situation it's never seen before?
Okay, my other question is for Don. Don, you mentioned the fact that you have partnerships and collaborations, and one of the things that PCAST is interested in terms of how research is changing is just what are the different partnerships and collaborations, and how are they enabling better science or advancing science? So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because I think when we think of industry, we think of the large companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Apple, but there's a whole segment of industry that's a little smaller, and that's where Esri fits in. Because, for instance, as one of the largest geographic information system companies in the world, we are still much smaller than Google and Microsoft and Amazon, and we rely on Microsoft and Amazon for their compute power. And so as we do our research and development, one of the things that we do is we're in the middle, so to speak. We don't have the compute power. We don't even have the funding to fund researchers. We don't have a grant program that these other larger companies have. So our model of collaboration is to slide in with the university. So for instance, we will work with a university or a group of universities on their NSF research grant. And then we will be involved in that research at no cost, because we are a corporate company. And for instance, we have been involved in several NSF convergence accelerators. I love the discussion of convergence research. And so we have been senior PIs on these NSF convergence accelerator grants, participating in the research with the university researchers. Our contribution is that we leverage what compute power and all of our knowledge, we leverage at no cost to the grant. The final product is the intellectual property of the university researchers, but we take in that research as well and use it, bake it into our research and development. Now, so that's one model. Another model that we have is a sabbatical program where university researchers can be in residence with us. That's not so unique, but for us, it's quite unique in our geospatial industry to have a university researcher with us for anywhere from a few weeks to an entire year as part of their sabbatical. They are working on something with us that benefits our technology, that pushes our technology ahead, but is also of interest and helps them to advance their research goals as well. Another thing that is quite unusual, maybe, is that within our company, we take 30% of our profits and turn that back into research and development. And we're trying to get other companies to recognize the value in this. 30% of revenue, and we're a billion-dollar company, 30% is a large chunk. And we now have our own research and development centers around the world, which these are also places where university faculty can work with us. And they can work with us in terms of sabbaticals or research projects. Oftentimes, we just work with universities or with nonprofits on research, and there's no money that changes hands. We just want to work together. And we agree that we are going to share the results publicly and openly, as we also take in the results to our own R&D. So it's a free-flowing, double-ended back and forth arrangement there. So I think this also speaks to perhaps John DeBeery's question earlier in terms of these other modes of collaboration. And we do have a collaboration guide that I can share that URL with the PCAST staff that explains these different modes. Thank you.
Do you ever run, I mean, to follow up on that, do you ever run into intellectual property issues that make it very hard to work with a university?
No, with the university, we take a different tack where the university keeps their intellectual property. We don't sign non-disclosure agreements with universities. We do that with our business partners. That's a different game with businesses, but with universities, Well, we sort of, as a company, we function like a university or like a nonprofit. It's one of the reasons why I'm working for this company, because I still feel like a college professor. It's got the same type of culture. I think company culture is very important, and it would be very interesting to dive into or to find out a bit more about different company cultures, because as Jola said, it's about the people, not necessarily about the data and the AI, all of the technology is incredibly important, but we still have a lot of people issues to solve.
Right. Jen, we're finally making our way to you.
No worries. Thanks to each of you for really fascinating presentations. I am a social scientist and a psychologist, and that's why I love the inclusion and emphasis on the role of social science research in the types of work each of you is doing, and just in general. And so I would love to hear more from any of you, and maybe each of you, about how to encourage, if not really cultivate, this type of convergence research with the social scientists, especially with social scientists, on the teams from the beginning, right? A lot of the I really heard, from Jola in particular, talked about how, we're doing a lot with climate and measuring what we think, what we do need to measure, but then at some point we realize, oh, we actually don't have the people we need to help, to sort of take to the next step. And I think that's obviously important insight and important approach, but it also would be, it could be, especially at this stage, important to develop teams from the beginning that, are focused obviously on a set question or societal impacts, a challenge that's already interdisciplinary. So do you have thoughts about whether, one, how to make this happen, barriers to this possibility, and of course, are there lessons learned from where this sort of the need for convergence research, you realized it too late, and how can we avoid that moving forward?
That's great. I'm glad you asked that, Jen. Jola, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Jen. I think that's an important question, and if it's okay, I'll speak about my experience. One of the issues that I think is important in really how to do this is really funding is key, right? And so some of us as social scientists, when you apply for a fund, they want you to write your grant application in a language that fits the natural science mode, and that doesn't really work. And so in the research that I've done, which is the one that I mentioned about the National Center for Atmospheric Research, one of the key things they did was to make sure that the funding that they put out for working on climate change was essentially social science led. So you have to be a social scientist to be the PI. So that was really good. So a lot of us in the social sciences were encouraged by that. And so centering social sciences were really helpful. But the other thing was also when we got, when you got selected to the process, then they also show you a variety of natural sciences at NCAD that you could work with. You could easily reach out to anybody, or they could suggest people to you. And so they did that. So that also helped us. And there is also the process of talking in one another's language, right? There are certain languages people are mentioning in the sciences that social sciences don't understand. And the social sciences also, there are things we talk about, decolonization, whatever, addressing racism, that it becomes a little bit difficult for the natural scientists. So there is often that, a process of learning together and working together and speaking each other's language, then before you start to do the work. And so that was, we had about, I think, 6 months to just walk through things and decide what the research was going to be, and then the communities we're going to work with. And that, I think, really helped me feel confident as the lead PI for that project without having to, be subservient to somebody else. But I was the person really making the decisions, and that really just transformed the way I thought about research and that I thought about climate, and also how I valued science. It really changed from looking at science from afar to thinking, I'm a scientist. I'm a social scientist, but I'm so a lead for a really important research. I think that is very helpful. But also making sure the funding translates in ways that we bring in multiple pipelines of students. So a lot of students that work with me, some of them people of color, some of them scientists. So I had a variety, and some were also international students that worked with me on the project, and we were all learning together. And so that was how, for me, convergent research translated into bringing people at different career levels, different knowledges, but also working with the community. We were learning together to be able to address the big issues we're looking at, which was the cascading disasters in the Portland region. So that's one way I thought was helpful, centering social scientists, but also providing funding and allowing them to actually take the lead rather than putting them in the secondary position.
Thank you. Dr. Wright?
Yes, boy, I love hearing about those kinds of projects where the social scientists are in the lead. I think the only thing that I can add to Jola's comprehensive answer there is that from the standpoint of, again, in industry, where we collaborate, we now have a social science initiative, we have a racial equity and social justice initiative so that our technology is used properly towards those ends. And given that we do so much R&D within our company, as other companies do, I think one of the things we can do is to recognize the diversity, the disciplinary diversity that is in industry, that is in these companies. So if you have, say, a Microsoft or a Google or an Amazon or an Esri, we are not just all computer scientists or mechanical engineers or technologists. We have, for instance, on our staff, PhDs in anthropology who are working on our user experience, user interface team. And as they're working on the user interface of our software, they are also engaged in research as social scientists with other social scientists. And we have calls for social scientists to come work with us on how can we understand mobility in cities and get older people to the services that they need, and how can our technology be used to that end. Let's do this research together so that for us at Esri, we can make better technology that will, so that we can guide our users in that way. And so what we would do would be to get on a project led by Jola or other social scientists funded by NSF. We would participate in that grant and move forward, as I mentioned before.
And then how would such a project be rolled out to the actual users? Who would pay for that?
Well, from our standpoint, if it's an NSF funded project, NSF is paying for it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the research side, but actually rolling it out to get it into people's hands, who's responsible?
So what we do is that we pay that cost to roll that project out. We give our resources, we give the workflows or the software packages away. We take our time to go into, we are paid for our time, but we can use our time to go into these communities and help implement these solutions. We also have a consulting, our company started as an environmental consulting firm, and that part of our company has paid grants and contracts as a consulting firm would, but we also donate consulting services in these instances as well.
And Dr. McGovern, would you like to respond?
I would, because I think I have a slightly different viewpoint on the question. I've actually talked about the barriers to convergence research in a previous talk, and I think that the funding already got mentioned. But one of the other things that's very different and that can prove to be a barrier is the timeline for doing the social science research versus doing the traditional, the AI. You've developed a new model, you tested it, you trained it, and now overnight you have a new model you can test. When you work with people data, it's a lot slower. And the really big one that has happened inside AI2ES is just that there's a very small number of people who are trained to do this level of convergence research and to work across the disciplines. And that actually becomes a barrier, right? Because we saw the value of how much we really wanted them to work, and then we wanted them to work all across all the projects. When there's a very small number of people, you can't do that. And more funding doesn't necessarily solve that, because I don't think there's quite the infinite supply of such trained people for social scientists that you can just hire more with if you have more money. Although I'm not going to say that more money is bad, because I think that social science needs more money. But just that barrier of the number of people is something that I didn't hear out of either of the other answers. And it's something that we've really seen with our social science leads, but they would really like to be able to double their manpower, but they can't.
Great. Any other comments on that issue? Dan?
Well, actually, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question here. This is so inspiring. Oh my goodness, the three presentations have complemented one another quite nicely. We're going to have a session next on STEM workforce, the federal STEM workforce, and that's got some relevance here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But I wanted to pull the thread that you've already started on. John started on it. Jen mentioned it. I think all of us care about it deeply. And Jolie, you mentioned funding. It's I know we're trying to stay away from, we need more money for everything, but it is relevant. It is very relevant, especially as Don suggested, or I'm sorry, I think it was Amy suggested that so much of the work that's been done, especially in the AI area, is private sector and, essentially funded and I'm going to say it, and it's not meant to be pejorative in any way, but it's profit motivated in some way. In the case of public facing research that in this area, it's lagging behind. The public's value, the societal benefit to the public needs to be supported by the government in some way. And as I look at the research enterprise, and specifically around what NSF looks at, very broad charter. They do lots of things. They don't have enough money to do all the aspirational things they want to do. They have to make choices. And one of the things that's happening is, especially with these large programs, large facilities, is the capital expenditure, the upfront is extremely expensive, very complex. And frankly, the government doesn't have enough money to do it all. So now they're transitioning to a public-private relationship where the mission goals of both are actually satisfied through a partnership. Working on how do you develop enough of the public-minded research effort so that you get that societal benefit is really one of the challenges I think that we're all facing. I'd love to hear your perspectives on that, especially because we already understand, you want to democratize. There's access to these incredible facilities that essentially not everyone can afford. So how do you share, and how does that public-minded research actually get mentioned in that whole ecosystem? So I didn't pose a question all that well, but I'm anxious to get your thoughts on that. So thank you.
Who would like to take that?
Well, I think I'll just speak quickly from the standpoint of a mid-tier member of private industry. We are not the richest. We are not the poorest. If we could, we would love to put millions and billions of dollars to share that wealth with universities, and to fund them and bring them along, similar to what Amy's institute is doing. I think one alternative way that our company looks at things is that we take what wealth we have in terms of our knowledge and in terms of our resources, and we tend to give a lot of that away. We give our software away to 10,000 nonprofits, for instance. And that's not just throwing software at them, that is actually working with them on projects, giving of our time. We can charge our time up to $100 an hour. And if we do that for free, that is a different kind of investment. It is not giving cash, but time is such a precious commodity. So we'd like to see more parts of industry do that. And even in terms of these AI issues, and who is in the room, where's the intrinsic bias and the intrinsic harm being discussed as we are training these models? What gets prioritized? What training data? Who is training it? Again, who's building the user interface? How and when should the toxins, the hallucinations be removed, as was mentioned prior? I think just to close, we would like to see industry be much more involved intimately with organizations such as the United Nations and the National Geographic, and of course with across federal national governments. We are all trying to do our part as well.
I'll jump in too. I think it ties into the question that was asked earlier, like directly asked whether or not I wanted more supercomputing power at Oklahoma. And my answer is no. It's not that we don't have we have a good supercomputer, right? But that's not the solution that is equitable across. And when I was talking about partnerships, I'm not seeing, so there's a program at NSF that's called Cloud Bank, and I think it's great. It allows universities to run on these cloud-based computing systems, but that's not the kind of partnerships I was pushing for that I think would address your question. The kind of partnerships I want to see are true integrations across industry and academia, actually working together on the problems, brainstorming together, and then you're using the resources of the grad students and the faculty at the university, but you're being able to use the computing resources. So it isn't just throwing cloud time at it either that is the solution. It's truly making a partnership where they can work together.
Yeah,
All right,
and could I just add one more thing? Marcia McNutt mentioned that one of the most amazing things that could happen is if a university grad student does research with a company and then walks down the street to that company and starts working for that company in the next few weeks or years, and we need much more of that type of activity as well.
Yeah. What do you think the federal government can do there to pull on that thread?
I don't think that the partnerships are set up very well between the federal agencies and academia in terms of timeline and industry, right? So they're set up for academia getting grants. They're not set up for academia to work with the government. Like I work a lot with NOAA, and they're just not set up to transition the technology over. It's kind of a valley. You have to throw your technology, they call it the valley of death. And you have to see if it hits and if it gets implemented. And if we could add private industry into those partnerships, but they're just not set up. There's no mechanism for it right now. And that's where the government could step in. There actually is a PCAST report about this. It's a 2020 PCAST report that's about making new kinds of partnerships between academia and industry and NGOs and all sorts of just envisioning new partnerships. And it never really came about. And I would love to see some of the stuff that's in that PCAST report actually appear, because I think it would help solve some of these problems.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Paula.
Excellent discussion. And I'm actually going to ask another question about partnerships. I'm really interested in how we can engage the largest corporations. We've heard about Esri, and thank you, Don, for giving us really a picture of how wonderfully engaged the company is and committed. And this is a company culture that I think leads to the kinds of partnerships that are really integrative. But how do we bring the large companies in that have resources or data or access that makes so much more possible? Do you have any thoughts on what the motivators are there, and how we might be able to do that effectively and create more meaningful partnerships across large and medium and companies, as well as academia and government?
I think the large companies march to a different beat from my observation of watching Google. And that is just that if you want to have an internship, you have to submit a whole proposal to do it. We also have partnerships with very small companies. I like that Don was talking about the different sizes of companies. We go all the way down to a one-person company. He wants to do something, he does it. Right. And I think that these larger companies it's like an enormous university. There's an amount of bureaucracy there, and we have to find a way to work through it. And if we want to make these meaningful partnerships, there has to be some incentive. All of our industry partners are like what Don said, they don't get any money from our NSF funding, right? Our NSF funding goes entirely to academia, but then there has to be a way to incentivize them to work with us. And that doesn't currently exist other than the good of their own heart right now. So if we can find that incentive, I think it would be good.
Do you think that access? Oh, yes.
I'm
Both
sorry.
of you said something.
I wanted to tack on to Amy's comments, which I absolutely totally agree with. Right now, I think so you've heard about our company, but other companies, there is this X for good. Companies want to be seen to be doing the right things now. I think the culture, societies are changing to the point where it's not all about making money. I think climate change and racial inequity has brought this to the fore, and a lot of companies are starting to sit up and take notice. I don't work for Amazon, but I'm involved in a project where Amazon Web Services has an impact computing project now, and they are linked with Harvard's data science initiative, and they are funding Harvard at different levels for these use-inspired projects that are going on there that are going to make impacts throughout the U.S. and throughout Africa, and food security, climate resilience, flood mitigation, and so on. And several of us are involved in partnerships there. But Amazon Web Services did that out of, it was very intentional. And they want to be able to do those kinds of things. So I think hopefully we don't hear about these kinds of things enough. So hopefully we'll hear more about what is happening with large industry.
Do you think we also can help industry see the gains that they get in these kinds of partnerships? Are there other things that might incentivize if they have a better idea of what they can gain? Or if there are things that the government can do to indicate greater access to data?
I think I don't want to use too inflammatory of a example, but companies see that they can make money. It's good for business. So we, for instance, we are we make proprietary software, but we have seen that it's good for our business to open our software and to play well with open source and to produce open source. That is good for our bottom line as well. Or it's like oil companies, perhaps, that are seeing that it's no longer going to be viable to take fossil fuels out of the ground, alternative energies now, that is the new world, that's the new way to go. So governments can certainly make that point with industry, continue to make that point.
Thank you. Kathy Wotecki.
Well, also, I'd like to follow up on this thread that Dan started. Paula elaborated on new ways of partnering. And I come out of the life sciences, where there's a substantial body of literature about bias associated with industry involvement in funding of science. And I wanted to start with Jola and ask, in the work that you've been doing in convergence, how industry involvement and these questions of bias in the design, the conduct, the results of the work can be handled, and how you envision these new partnerships being built.
Thank you. I personally do not work with companies. I mostly work with scientists and students. But to address your question, what I was, and then in terms of partnership, we do work where students get embedded in community organizations as opposed to just companies. But as people were talking, as Dawn was talking and Amy was talking, I was thinking how wonderful it would be to have not just a pipeline of funding that can fund a variety of students, but the students get experience being embedded in community-based organizations and learning from, people, the visceral experiences they've had with climate change and the struggles, but also, in 6 months' time, they can work with companies and get embedded there as well. Then after a few period, then they get another experience with, whether it's Esri or other company. And that way, the whole idea of convergence research can also translate in a new way. It's not just being in an academic institution, it's learning in different ways. And those set of people, in my mind, I was thinking about the generations of people that will be doing convergence research. How can they begin to learn about why it is important and doing it now? And so finding funding to support students in different ways where they can learn from these different groups of people and organizations and industry, I think would be a way to channel those new partnerships going forward. But at the moment, I'm not on the company side because I'm more of a social justice advocate. And, sometimes there can be this disparity in how we think about companies, but it's really great to learn about what Esri is doing and what other companies are doing to center racial and social justice. And it will be exciting to have students partner with different groups of people to really learn and advance convergent science.
Thank
I
you.
want to point to the PCAST report that I mentioned because I went and looked up the title so I could tell you. It's called Industries of the Future Institute. And it's about how to I don't know if PCAST has any membership transition between those two, but I'm hoping some of you, I saw some heads nods. So, I mean, I think that
We have
PCAST report talks a
staff.
lot about,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I thought that PCAST report taught a lot about innovative ways to have partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Steve?
I'll just say very quickly that the internship model works. We hear about it all the time. We talk about it, but it's not a new shiny object. It's not a new mode of collaboration, but it absolutely works because, especially if you have companies who are looking to take on interns full time. So at Esri, we hire about 40% of our interns that we fully fund during their summer internship, bringing in that young talent, but also those diverse perspectives. That is changing the culture of our company, and that's why we are taking on so many of these different projects. Like we have our UN projects overseas, and we have that GeoGlows project is sort of like a United Nations of Earth observation organizations. And the young people who are involved in that, we look to hire them. Our racial equity and social justice initiative came from young people that we recently hired in our company, as well as some people who are looking to raise their voices that we need to change the culture of our company. So more internships, more internships, more internships.
Steve Pacala.
So when it comes to climate resiliency, the working in this area, one of the things that is, I'm sure you've all found equally vexing. To quote the late, great Danny Kahneman, people have different agents in their minds, and the agents have different time discounting rates. And so when it's time to buy insurance, you've got this long time, you've got this short time discount agent that says, don't spend the money now because I need it. And when it comes to regretting the damage that you can't pay for, you've got a different agent in your mind. And no amount of data changes the fact that we have embedded in our minds what would be considered fundamentally irrational conflict if you have any single like objective function that you're trying to maximize whatsoever. And so here's the point. I want to get to a practical issue. FEMA right now is trying to deal with this issue by having risk-based cost of insurance, increasing the costs of insurance for people in areas that are flood prone, and people hate it. Okay, and yet, you know, as a nation, we're faced with trying to pay for and protect the citizenry. So I mean, these are terribly complicated issues. How would convergence research help in designing a FEMA program that worked better? What would you want FEMA to do that they aren't doing now to use the methods you've been working on to improve people's lives, with the understanding that no amount of accurate data alone is going to work?
Anybody want to take that on?
I could give it a try. Stephen, I think this question you've asked is really just so important. It's really fundamental to some of the work that I've been doing, though not directly with FEMA, but with communities on this issue we call buyouts, right? So where FEMA buys community house because the places have been repeatedly flooded. And in some areas, they implement higher insurance cost. And so, and when you think about the groups of people who have been bought out in certain locations, some of them are Black, some of them are poorer people, and there has been the equity issue in the buyout. There is also the equity problems with the insurance. If you institute a higher insurance, then who is able to pay? Essentially, you're forcing people to leave, and some people have defined that as blue lining. And so how do you address this issue? To be honest, I don't have a solution, but I think a step to get started, it's really to bring together, depending on where FEMA is operating and what the issues are, whether it's sea level rise or wildfire, because there are a variety of things that leads to the displacement of communities or the increase in insurance. And so it is really to work with the communities that are there, to bring together the researchers, as we've been talking about, to bring together the communities that are impacted, and also to think about how do we prioritize funding for those who want, for some people, they want to stay there. What sort of funding will be needed to be able to allow them to stay? Should we be using the federal government taxation programs, or are there other ways in which the communities can rethink whether they need to move and where would they move to? And if you're increasing insurance, are you increasing the insurance for the wealthier group, or are you increasing insurance for middle income or low income groups? So there's a whole lot of conversation that I think will be required, but it will be hard for any of us who are sitting here who are not maybe directly affected by those issues to make the decision. I think going back to the local level and talking to the local constituents and also the stakeholders there is the first way I would address this, is to understand what are the variety of issues, and let FEMA be in the room. Let other agencies that are important to this, addressing this local climate resilience challenges, wildfire, snowstorms, sea level rise. Let them all be in the room and talk about and come together to decide what are the different opportunities and the different scenarios that they need to consider in making a decision, and who is going to pay for it. So that would be my comment.
I want to give an AI answer too. It's not necessarily, I think it's a convergent answer, because I would have social scientists involved in this project, so we make sure that we get the product that they want. But something I said on my slide about being able to be more climate resilient and personalized weather forecasts is that what you were talking about, the agent that isn't able to visualize, we're not very good at risk. But if we could get something that was very personalized, that said, this is what my house is going to look like in 100 years. This is what my house is going to look like in 10 years. This is what the weather is going to look like. This is how many days I'm going to have to wear, nothing because it's so hot or whatever. Run my air conditioning. This is what my electric bill is going to look like. That kind of stuff could all be done by AI. It's impact-based forecasting, and you could really give an answer to you, right? It isn't just your city or it isn't just your state, it's to you. And I think that'll help drive the message to people as well, because people don't generalize well to a population. They think about the impacts for themselves.
That's an interesting viewpoint. Yeah.
And
And
it's
so
one
you feel
incidentally
that
yeah, it's
Go
just
ahead.
one incidentally that I agree with Amy. We've got a project I'm involved in that is allows you to take a storm surge forecast and turn it into an AI driven image video of the water rushing house. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what
so
I'm
they're
thinking
mapping
about.
the entire East Coast net right now. Yeah.
So individuals have to make the decisions.
In the end,
the government has decisions, right? The government can tell us to evacuate. But if you're trying to think about climate resiliency and you're trying to figure out whether you need to move or something, then you're making that choice.
That's right. That's right. No, I fully understand that. Great.
The
So
choice is not available to everyone. I think that's important to keep in mind. Some people want to move, but they don't have the resources to do so. So how do we help those people?
Yeah, I think we're talking about your own personal geography. It's your individual decision that you're going to have to make. It's your family that's going to have to move from point A to point B. How are you going to make that move? How are you going to handle the other parts of your life while you are doing that? And as the saying goes, there are apps or there are applications for these even personal decisions that need to be made now, but not everyone understands how to use that technology. And so another part of this is providing the resources to teach people how to use any of these applications that will help them to make those personal decisions. It gets to what Amy was talking about before, I think, in terms of social scientists with the specific AI know-how and training to do that type of work. There are not that many people like that. And part of what technology companies, I believe, and I think Esri believes should be about is, it's democratizing that knowledge of technology and making technology accessible to everyone, community leaders, school children, local politicians. And that is an area of research, I think, that may not be as fully recognized. To make something easy is not easy. That's a whole area of engineering research that is very valuable.
Thank you. Saul, we're up on our time for a break, which is all important. So if you could make your questions succinct and the answers succinct for the speakers.
I just want to follow up on the more larger than the individual response to these different recommendations that come out of this kind of work, which strikes me that in the end, you're going to need to move society to make group decisions, not just individual decisions. And we've seen that in our society, there's a lot of fragmentation and polarization that comes up that blocks many moves. So I was wondering, to what extent in all three of your areas have you worked on or thought about bringing in the natural places of resistance to social moves early on, so that there's a buy-in in the whole research process on it? So I don't know whether that's been worked on, and I'll open it to all three.
Brief responses, please.
I'll just answer that one's outside the scope of what we study, right? We're studying AI for weather and developing new AI methods, and we're working with our people, but not groupthink.
Thanks. Dawn?
I'll say quickly that a map is a universal language, and a lot of times we're able to foster groupthink through a common map. It's sort of like explaining, not trying to convince someone that climate change is real, but we can all agree that we need clean water and clean air. I mean, that is, a map is like that. It's a common ground. So good maps are good groupthink means of communication and bringing people together.
Great. Jola?
I would just add to what Donna said, even though people also, they challenge mass, but like she said, it's true, finding that area of convergence, that area of agreements. It could be around food security, it could be around water security, and starting from there. But you're right, absolutely, Saul. There is often, where I work and what I do, there's always the political divide. There are the decisions or the challenges between the Democrats and the conservative. There's a whole lot of issues that come together when we're trying to even have a conversation in the room. But finding that common ground is often the best way to get started in these conversations. And one last thing I would add is, even when we have the right tool, the right technology, and present it to people to make decisions, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will use those tools, especially when you're thinking about people who want to stay in their homes. They think about cultural ties. They think about their social network to people around them, and they prioritize those things. It's not to say that the technologies are not there, but people do not always prioritize technology in all of their decision-making.
Thank you. I want to thank all three speakers and also PCAST for, as usual, a spirited discussion. We will break briefly now and come back at 11:35. Please be prompt for the vote and discussion on the STEM workforce. Thank you again to the speakers.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone, from your very short break. This is the hardest working PCAST ever, because we're going to the federal STEM workforce. We're voting. We're very happy to be voting today on this topic that PCAST has been considering for more than a year. How do we support and expand the STEM talent in the federal workforce? So almost all PCAST reports, if you've read them, I hope that the audience has, almost all of them have included a discussion of our deep need for STEM talent in all the areas relevant to the report. In this particular report, we're addressing the federal government's need for STEM talent, because many activities essential to the effective functioning of our government require that talent. Most of you listeners and all the PCAST members are familiar with agencies whose missions clearly require technical expertise: NASA, NOAA, NSF, EPA. However, really every agency needs technical workers. Every agency has IT and increasingly AI efforts that require a STEM workforce. So as these agencies work to develop and implement programs that will be impactful, we've also heard that social science expertise is essential. So now I'd like to invite the co-leads of the STEM Workforce Working Group, Dan Arvisu and Kathy Sullivan, to summarize the letter they've prepared, which all of the members have received in your briefing book and you've already reviewed. Dan and Kathy.
Thank you, Francis, and I will apologize on Kathy's behalf. I'm not sure she was going to try to join us, but I don't think she made it this morning. But we did have a conversation last night, and we've certainly we're very pleased at being able to present this particular letter report, and hopefully it kind of meets the need and the mark that we've all been talking about for some time. I can't imagine a better intro to this topic than the session we just had with our colleagues that informed us about research and societal impacts, because it's so important. And the federal government has a role to play, and that's a clear piece of this. And as we all know, the world's changing. The world has changed. The approaches that we're taking is in need of innovation and creativity, and I think there is plenty of that. So let me get on to what our team has been doing, and we'll talk more about that in terms of the outcomes when we get to the discussion part. So let me just, again, for those who are not as familiar with PCAST reports, I'm not going to read you this slide, but it is essentially who we are in PCAST and how we approach the work that we've been chartered to do. And ultimately, we come up with reports that hopefully can reflect both things that have great national importance, and at the same time, something it's actionable, something that we can actually do to kind of make progress and move forward. So this is our charter. As Francis has mentioned, Kathy Sullivan and I have been co-leading this, but not without a tremendous amount of support and help. And I just want to give a shout out to our teammates here, Francis Colon, Paul Hammond, Phil Venables, and also honorable mention of one of our overall PCAST co-chairs, Maria Zuber, who's been a very active participant with us, obviously passionate like the rest of us are about this particular topic. So we thank all of them for the tremendous amount of work. And we've had multiple interactions with many of you. So you all kind of have been part of this for a couple of years now. If I go to the next slide, I think one of the things that we tried to do was to go through and say, okay, who are the most relevant people that we need to gain insights from on this topic? And obviously, the Office of Personnel Management is the essentially agency tasked to see and oversee this particular area. Every agency cares, but OPM has a particularly important role to play. And we've had some consults with many of the people, Karen Hua and Jason Mark from OPM have in a more recent administration, Beth Colbert, who was a former OPM acting director as well. Max Dyer from the Partnership for Public Service, Olivia Sue at the White House, who informed us about the great work that's going on with the executive order on AI, and specifically the surge that goes along with that particular executive order. And then Afisa Owens also helped us with STEM workforce education discussion. So we've had a number of consults. They've been extremely valuable in learning not just the nature of the issue, but the progress that has taken place since these topics have been discussed in the past. So without further ado, if we just go on to the next slide, we'll start with just going through some of the findings. You've seen these before, but we've crisped them up a little bit. We've tried to reflect specifically what is in the letter report now in these particular slides. So the first thing we'll say is several, kind of outcomes that we concluded early on, and one of those was that the federal workforce is aging, and I don't think that's a big surprise to anyone. And the statistics around that are relatively alarming. I mean, in the next 5 years, more than 30% and increasing of the federal workforce is going to be eligible to retire. That has implications for the STEM part of the workforce, which is not the whole workforce, but it is in fact part of that workforce. Another disturbing trend is that the aging suggests that we have less and less of the early career people, and that statistic is in the how many of the folks are under 30 in the federal workforce, and it's a small number, 7%. but it's declining. That's the part that I think is particularly alarming. Frances opened in her opening remarks talking about the value of the federal STEM workforce, and it is a requirement that is increasingly more important across every agency. So for the so-called STEM agencies, the Department of Defense and the NSF, NIH, those kinds of agencies very clearly need, STEM professionals. But even in other agencies, and we'll get into some of the recommendations about that, there's a number of demands, and it comes with the understanding that technology is diffusing, the digital economy and everything that goes with the AI discussions we just had around the value that it brings in so many different ways, and that is essentially pretty much distributed across all agencies in the federal government. If you go back one more, I'm not quite finished with that last slide. Here we go. There are two more things I just want to say. First of all, I think the one thing that we can say, and we're trying not to duplicate things that have already been done in the past, but there have been a number of well-documented reports, specifically by the GAO, the National Academies, and the National Academy of Public Administration, all have opined on and provided pretty lengthy evaluations, discussions, and recommendations that should be implemented in order to make progress on the workforce in the federal government, specifically around STEM. There are a number of special authorities that can be used, and in some cases are used more liberally, more aggressively than in other agencies, and there's a variety of reasons why that occurs. Clearly, the national security agencies have a little bit more urgency sometimes, and as a consequence, they go a little bit stronger in terms of their innovation and creativity around the things that are necessary to develop and bring in STEM talent. Okay, now to the next slide. Additional findings is, as we kind of did a double click and kind of drill down a little bit, what are the things that are really quite demanding and we're not making as much progress on as we would like? One of those is just hiring people just in general in the federal government is a difficult task. It's slow. There's a mountain of complexity that goes with it, and many times it's so long and complicated that it just really is a huge barrier to encouraging and making it easier for STEM professionals to want to work in the federal government. Additionally, there's a variety of ways to kind of try to dissect the problem, and it has to do with, first of all, we need to make federal government STEM careers more attractive, more appealing, more inspirational, things that really attract people so that they can release their passions around their professional work. And sometimes we don't do as good a job on that as we need to. Another element of that discussion regarding how do you attract people is, who are you trying to attract? Well, early career people, obviously high priority, but also seasoned professionals, people who have a tremendous amount of expertise and ability to support government programs and help government make good decisions. And we need to be able to attract them for what we call tours of duty or temporary roles. And we find that in each of those, it's a different set of responses or requirements that will give you the kind of outcomes that you're looking for. So you can't look at them all as one big umbrella. It's got to be segmented in a way that you can understand what specifically we're trying to accomplish, how we're going to do that. So that, again, that level of differentiation is really important to getting the kind of progress that we need. Now, the good news is, and I think this is something that's, I think, one of the staples of how PCAST has approached all of our reports, and that is we want to build on things that are already working, things and pilots and programs that we know have potential, and we have those. We have those in this arena of STEM recruiting and retaining federal employees. And again, I think this is in large part due to the fact that the clarion call occurred a number of years ago, more than a decade or more ago in some cases, and we've made some progress and or some things that are happening, and we want to highlight those. But we would offer that they're insufficient in terms of scale and scope for the nature of the evolving challenge that we have for STEM education, and I'm sorry, for STEM professional workers in the in the federal workforce. Again, there are some very interesting, innovative concepts that are already being piloted. Some of them are already producing results in ways that we're pretty excited about. Again, they need to be scaled and perhaps scoped. Pool hiring, things like having a reservoir of very, very highly talented, qualified STEM professionals that are ready to go to a particular agency, and for whatever reason they can't go to that agency after they've been recruited, to have that repository also be applicable to other agencies, so other agencies can take advantage of those very highly qualified people. And then the one thing that I think we all recognize right up is that the human capital offices in each agency are extremely challenged. In many cases, they have a hard time understanding what are my future STEM requirements for my mission objectives, and at the same time, how will I know that? And then how do I recruit those kind of people? That requires a partnership between the subject matter experts and the human capital offices so that there is a collaboration. So we define those needs more clearly, and at the same time are able to then to recognize that the talent that will fit into the positions that have been identified, and then from there we get to, I think, to the outcomes that we're looking for. Let's see. I think the last thing I'll say, I think, in terms of finding is many respondents that we talked to, in so many different ways said, look, PCAST needs to speak out on this. This is really important. And although some progress and some highlights can be acknowledged, a lot more needs to be done. So that would be the next thing. So let's go to the next slide. I think one of the things that in terms of this pool hiring and the special the subject matter experts approach, one program that I think OPM is kind of highlighting is this notion that this is this collaboration between the human capital office and also the subject matter experts, where this process leads us to be able to walk through how that ultimately would be implemented, and this graphic from OPM provides a little bit of the details on how you get agreement around what kinds of things are needed. There's job announcements, there's resume reviews in two different ways, in two different rounds. And so this is kind of notionally, with 98 applicants, 40 of them were identified in the first round as being potential candidates, 24 in the second round where, okay, these are now hireable candidates. And then so out of 98, so roughly, this graphic would suggest something around 15% of the applicants are essentially eligible to be hired, some better qualified than others for the various positions. But if you've gone through this process, then you've got essentially vetted individuals who are ready for service, and you don't have to go through this process every time a different agency would like to have those kinds of individuals. So this has great promise in it, and specifically the idea of pooled hiring is very, very interesting in terms of the way I think the agencies are seeing how we can improve on the process that we presently have. Going to the next slide, I think we start with the recommendations. We've got 6 recommendations. We failed to number them on these slides, but just this recommendation number 1, and this is precisely how they are stated in our letter report. So the first recommendation is that look, we want to adopt those things that appear to have promise. OPM has done some things. I mean, if you just look at things like the AI surge, if you go back and look at OPM's own internal performance report, the latest one, what they will offer you is that in September of 2022, right after we were really focused on AI and Chips and Science Act has gone through, and now there were a number of AI positions identified that we wanted to fill. The goal at OPM was that 75% of those should be filled within the next year. So by September of 2023, and this is in their report, they had a goal of 75%. With an AI surge and the elements that it provided, they were able to get 100% of those in less than a year. Now that is maybe not as much progress as we would like to say. We need these things to be hired much more quickly than that. But to get all of the positions in AI from the government that was required is really an indicator of some major progress in that area. So let's adopt those things that are working. If you go to the next recommendation, again, we need to modernize and accelerate how we hire. As I mentioned earlier, differentiating what type of individual we're looking for. Is it early career? Is it a tour of duty? Is it temporary kinds of things? And implement those things that help accelerate and ultimately make it maybe a cross-agency sort of role for STEM professionals to have maybe a different mechanism in entering the workforce than we've seen in the past. Going to the next recommendation. Again, the Pathways program, I think that OPM has begun to really focus on, has got tremendous potential. And leveraging, again, the Department of Commerce innovation hubs is a piece of that Pathways program. This is helping with interns. It's helping with recent graduates. It's helping with presidential fellows. All of these programs have very specific and important elements of them that ultimately I think can be captured for greater value. Going on to I think now we're on the next recommendation, number 4. Lower the barriers for seasoned experts, especially those in the AI world where simply the government has a hard time affording these people just in general. And even if they're willing to come for, the conditions under which the government operates, the requirements for conflict of interest sometimes are extremely onerous, and it just prohibits people from, you've got to divest all of your, your personal finances and a variety of other things. There are ways to do that, and I think that's really where I think our focus is let's make the service in federal government a little bit more user friendly to get the kind of people that we need. We don't say don't mitigate conflict of interest. That's not our point. Our point is we could do a lot less things that important, and using special authorities allow us to do these kinds of things. And I might add, special authorities are difficult sometimes, and they're very, very complex. There's just a number of ways in which special authorities can be implemented, but our review of that says that there's literally hundreds of special authorities with very special provisions. And that mosaic of complexity that goes with how do I actually use one of these things is not easy, and in fact prohibitive in so many different ways. Okay, the next slide or next recommendation, number 5, really has to do with this is a relationship and interdependency between OPM, all the other agencies, subject matter experts, human capital organizations of all kinds. All of this needs to have champions, and our recommendation is that every agency ought to have a champion. They ought to have someone designated to look at this human capital issue from the perspective of how do we improve STEM professional recruitment and retaining, and at the same time do that in a way that that focuses on mission and helps us get to the using the best practices that we can, which is the next recommendation. But in this case, reporting to the agency head to say, here's our perspective, here's our plan, and have someone at the highest level to be championing this. And this is what this particular recommendation is about. And the last recommendation we're making is once we start to get information about those kinds of things that are working, there ought to be a place. We stop short of telling you how to do it. But there ought to be a place where all of these initiatives and successes and the best practices are shared and kept for government-wide distribution so that everybody can see the kinds of things that are going. So these 6 recommendations are the ones that we propose. I think the next slide is a thank you. At this point, Francis, I'll turn it back over to you to help us get our committee's discussion going.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Please turn your videos back on and we can discuss this. And I'll start off just for a clarification, Dan, to who are the first 4 recommendations directed to?
So I think these have to do with maybe suggesting that there's an executive order or something where the executive branch is essentially making the kinds of expectations known to each of the agency heads. So this would be something that I think would probably go to OSTP, but I'll look to my colleagues here to see if there's anyone else that's got maybe a better
But all the
answers than
hiring is
that.
done by the individual agencies. So each agency has to buy into this plan. Is that?
Yeah,
Or they
that's our presumption. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that each agency has once directed by the president that this is an important topic, each agency head would then have, we stopped short of saying they need to have a report and a variety of other things. That may be the mechanism, but at the same time, I think this is a topic of great interest and needs to be at the highest levels of each agency, that they're that they're working on trying to employ some of these best practices.
And I would just like to make sure that our listeners fully understand the rapid rate of change in science is much, much greater than the rate of change in the federal government, right? And that's why we're so far behind, and we're so much in need of this revitalization, not just expansion, but a real revitalization, getting those young people in, getting people who don't stay forever, right? And expertises. We really need to rethink the way that STEM talent is recruited and retained in the federal government. And I think your report does a great job at that.
Thank you for those comments. It's precisely how we think about it.
Maria.
Yeah, thanks. So Dan, congratulations to you and Kathy and the rest. I think having read through all the reports that exist, it was what more could be said. And I think that this is really, hard-hitting and actionable and not terribly hard to do, quite frankly. So one of the interesting things that you found was that agencies actually have authority to do certain things to accelerate hiring. And some agencies use those authorities, on a regular ongoing basis, and some won't use those authorities even though they have them. And I'm just wondering if your group has thought about how to incentivize, with this is not even changing anything, but just incentivizing those agencies or parts of agencies that don't use these authorities to actually use them.
Yeah, that's a great question, Marie. And I think what we found is we looked at agency by agency. They come at it differently, and in some cases, it's the complexity of the process that's a barrier. The fact is, when we started looking at what is that matrix of special authorities, I was thinking it was okay. Well, here's a half a dozen things. No, it's 200 things. Where with very specific authorities that are specific to a particular agency, a particular section of an agency, only under certain conditions. And there's like 6 or 7 conditions on each one of these authorities. Wading through that maze of columns and rows of all the possibilities that one could use. First of all, the complexity is tough, and I can't even imagine what a human capital resource officer is trying to manage.
The barriers. Dan, what are the barriers to rationalizing the authorities?
Yeah, that's essentially the recommendation is how do you make it clear so that any agency who has a very specific need know where they fit in this broader matrix of again, some congressional actions, some EOs, and a variety of other things that people don't even understand. So that's one big barrier. There's another more cultural barrier, and it relates to this idea that in some agencies, there's a care to be concerned about the existing professional staff. And when you bring in people with special authorities, they kind of go around the bureaucratic requirements that the rank and file have already been required to follow. So it's like these people are being treated special, And now all of a sudden I got a morale issue inside of my organization. So we heard that as well. So it's not just a single thing, it's multiple things. When there's a sense of urgency that we got to get this done no matter what, and we've got some level of safety net from, you know, the hierarchy, that allows them to take a little bit more risk in employing some of these things. So those all are elements, I think, that ultimately create this resistance to really digging down and find out what can I do, and I'm going to go do it. So
yeah. So Dan, it would be I mean, it sounds like some of these complexities are self-inflicted here, and you know, not required by statute, but put into place maybe for a good reason a long time ago and then never revisited. But a streamlining of the process would help the human capital professionals, I think, you know, among others. And
Right.
you know, I would also say relative to the staff who came in under the, you know, previously overly complex model, or arguably overly complex model. It might have been okay at the time, but you know, that you know, residents in hospitals used to work way too long hours, and that system had to get fixed, you know,
Right.
under the auspices of patient safety. And it was, you know, it's difficult to fix things like that, but you know, those kind of things are fixable if
Yeah.
people see a better future on the horizon. So
Yeah, Francis said it right. The landscape that we're dealing with is changing. It's evolving. And all of a sudden now we need more STEM professionals, not less. The roles that they play are now more pronounced than they were in the past. You know, we've got to think about, you know, and again, the Pathways program is really quite a good example of this. We need to think about, you know, competency-based hiring as opposed to just the credential. I think, Phil, you mentioned this, you know, in your comments. There's a lot of roles that people can play that are STEM related that don't require the ultimate credentials that sometimes the federal government seeks. So opening up the aperture a little bit on what role is it that you want them to play, and what expertise do you really need, and does it need, you know, a PhD in you know, some very technical area in order to do the role. And frankly, what we find is that no, there's a lot of roles that can be played. Some of them don't require credentials, you know, very few credentials, I would add. And so all of that landscape is the policies that we've employed in the past, and all the special authorities that were employed in the past did not necessarily acknowledge this changing landscape and environment. And that's where I think, you know, that forward lean public policy always kind of lags, you know, the technology evolution. And this is no different. And it really relates to the STEM workforce as well.
Yeah, and actually just to echo that, I mean, that sometimes when we say STEM, we never unpick it apart. And if you unpick it apart into the science and the technology, exactly to your point, Dan, we get like all sorts of different opportunities on the technology side, even if it's still hard on the science side.
Yeah, a great point. That's a great point.
Bill Dally?
I think you're on mute, Bill.
First of all, thanks for a great report. You made a lot of really good points. One thing I think you talked around a little bit is the fact that the GS scales are simply out of whack with the market for STEM people. And particularly if you pick STEM apart and focus on computer science and AI, where fresh PhDs are getting $400,000 a year offers fresh out of college. And you know, we really need these people in the government. I mean, there's a real need to have expertise there and not be picking up the crumbs that are left after the people take the good jobs. And I would offer that we really need some creative ways of addressing this, whether we create an additional scale separate from that allows us to pay market rate for these people. I think we already get around this a little bit using FFRDCs and contractors, but ultimately we need people in the government with this expertise. And we have to have a way of doing that. I don't know if there's creative ways of handling this, like paying for people's college in exchange for them working, you know, for some number of years. The military does that in certain cases, but we have to align ourselves with the marketplace if we're going to attract the really good people that we need to lead the nation in these areas.
Absolutely correct, Bill. And frankly, the special hiring authorities sometimes give latitude to do, okay, so a little bit more pay. I think we've talked before that, going from a GS9 to a GS11 isn't really going to probably carry the day in this arena. We know that. But there are all these other things. Specifically, are we talking early career? Are we talking seasoned professional? You need to kind of differentiate what your requirements are for each of those. But in the case of those who might be willing even to work for a lot less in terms of compensation for the purpose of providing public service, then now let's give them the latitude to do that if they want to. They essentially want to make those kinds of personal, I'm going to call it personal decisions, where they're passionate about something and they want to be involved in public policy. Let's not make it so onerous that they can't participate. And that's where the conflict of interest things come in. And we want to capture people's passion. If it's an attractive place to work, they're willing to make sacrifices or make trade-offs, and that's okay. But we kind of give them, we cut off every one of the things that they might make it attractive, and then there's nothing left for them to essentially to trade off at that point. So your point's extremely well taken. It's not a perfect solution to just give everybody the kind of money that the private sector can give them. You really can't and probably shouldn't do that. On the other hand, there are so many things you can do that can be helpful. So really
you say you can't. Is there a statutory limit on that, or is it simply that the government won't, that it's a cultural thing that's done it this way for so long?
I would offer it's probably the second, that they just won't. It's not that they can't. I think I've had personal experiences where someone told me, hey, tell us what you need and we'll just get it for you, right? Well, I'm not sure that's really the way they do it, but that was what was stated. I'm thinking, well, that means they got a lot more flexibility than I thought they did. But in general, I think that is it's a great question, and I think it's more cultural, and frankly, I don't think the thinking about how we hire has caught up with the expanding revolution that we've got in technology. So they lag, as we know, but we need to close that gap.
Great. Sue.
I wanted, first of all, compliment your report and taking this on. I think it's extremely important, Dan. So you and your colleagues have done a service to put this together. I have a little bit of a concern that I want to ask you about, and it may be that I'm worried about the wrong thing. For me, when I look at working somewhere, I look at the conditions, the salary, the values, all the things you would think about, but I also look at who already works there. So how do you think about retention and having that dynamism you're looking for that I completely agree with? If I'm looking, I look at somebody who's been there 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, are they thriving? And so I think when we think about retention, we often think in the federal government of somebody who's been there decades, but people wanting to stay is a vote of confidence in the workplace. So how did you guys think about retention?
It's a great question, and I invite any of our teammates here to offer their comments. Retention is again back to if it's early career, which is I think what we're talking about here in that respect. It's early career people as opposed to people that are doing tours of duty. Therein lies, I think, getting people excited. I have colleagues that I worked for 25 years at Sandia National Labs, and we had like 40 or 50 people that were always assigned in some sort of role, as interns or varieties. I was surprised, and I was kind of managing. We had 40 at one time that I was overseeing. I was surprised that about a third of them decided to stay. And these are people that, decided to make that change from from a contractor, National Labs, to the federal government because they were passionate about how their profession would ultimately play out and the role they could play. They felt they had something of real value that their personal contribution could add to. So I see that retention thing is part of making the culture of the organization so attractive that people want to go there because it has such great value. There's a number of places within the federal government where that occurs. You know, you can talk about NASA and a variety of others where, you know, as little kids, people want to work at NASA. That's such a great opportunity, right? And you know, Kathy always you know, would highlight those kinds. It's the same in NOAA where she worked before. You know, those things where you're making a difference, where you're doing something. Really better.
So the work itself, the ambition, the mission drives the retention. Yeah.
Sue, Dan, could I just jump in a second? You know, another aspect of this, Sue, I think is if you go and you work in the government in public service, you know, what kind of job do you get when you leave? You know, I mean, if an agency gets a reputation that if you go there and you you know, at a much lower salary that you could have gotten, and you do a stint there and you make a real contribution that you feel good about, that there are higher paying jobs on the outside that you could transition to, and you get a great reputation as a place that's a great early career place to work. And you know, that's another thing that, you know, ought to be looked at as well.
Yeah. You're extremely hireable, so to speak. That's a great way to attract more talent. I agree.
So too.
Great. Vicky Sato.
I'll add my voice to and my thanks to this group. This is an incredibly important topic, and I think the crispness of this letter is fantastic. So thank you for that. I have two questions to ask that build on some points that Maria brought up earlier. One is and I know you're trying not to be terribly prescriptive in terms of saying, do the following 20 things, but you mentioned that some agencies are much more successful at attracting and hiring and filling their positions. And you mentioned the national security agencies. Are there a couple of practices that they have that could be specifically called out as relevant and generalizable? For example, is there more on-campus recruiting? Is there more specific highlighting of the excitement around the projects to do? So that's one kind of question. Are there best practices that can be and should be emulated? And the other has to do with these hiring practices that have lists of 200 requirements. Do the agencies have the authority to take out a clean piece of paper? Or are these things so grandfathered? Or is it just, as you mentioned before, a lack of will? Because if it's the latter, then one can be much more directive about the emergency nature of this hiring problem and this deficiency, and really push harder to draft a different set of hiring processes.
Yeah. And Vicky, I'm going to show my age and my gender. I cannot parallel process. So I'm going to take one question at a time here. Let me try to address that your second question first, because I'll have to ask you what the first question was again. But so let me see if I can organize my thoughts here. The second question had to do with, I'm sorry, now I've lost the thread. One more time.
Sorry if it was too complicated.
Why don't you rationalize the process? Why don't you tell them to start from scratch and rationalize the process? What are the barriers to that?
Okay, I had a thought, so you're going to have to repeat the question because I really did lose my thought on that. So Vicky, give me one more time the question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so the second question, the one that Francis was just referring to, is: do the agencies have the authority to take out a clean piece of paper, or are they somehow trapped by the 200 regulations on hiring that have been accumulated over the millennia?
Yeah, I think agencies have the authority to do more than they do. I think it's a matter of risk. And you know, are we going to implement something that is going to, you know, either be rejected by, you know, the people that they respond to in some way? I think they've got a number of authorities, but it really has to do with very specific. I don't know what my overall risk profile looks like if I start to implement these. For the Intel folks, they don't feel constrained at all. You know, if a worker wants to have you know, a remote work location, for instance, just talk about, you know, someone that's coming in for a tour of duty. which is what they typically do. They can do that, and in many cases they do. It's for a limited amount of time, so they take them out of, it's kind of like a workaround as opposed to central.
But Dan, I think the question, that's not the question. The question,
Okay.
as I understand it, is why don't we start with a clean sheet of paper? Why don't we recommend that the agencies just take a clean sheet of paper and rationalize their processes? Is that, Vicky, is that?
Yes, right. I know you're
Well,
trying not to be prescriptive, but the situation is sufficiently dire that I wonder if some prescriptive recommendations like that, or like the security agencies do more on-campus recruiting. I just are there some specific actions that would light a fire and give direction?
Well, yeah, that's really hard to answer. I think there probably are. I'm at a little bit of a loss, only because I'm as I think through what to offer something that isn't that's agency wide and not specific to a single agency is a more challenging task, if you will. I think which is why our recommendation was more about every agency ought to evaluate its specific needs. One of the things in the GAO report early on was that you need to identify what your required competencies are, your required STEM competencies are for your mission objectives of the future. And many agencies cannot do that. They don't have the expertise to do that. They need to have their partnership with their subject matter experts. So that's prohibitive. Now, in the case of national security, you've got a much more urgent mission objective that allows you to be a bit more prescriptive and say, yes, we're going to go do this. And even if the morale of the rank and file starts to suffer, we're still going to do this. That's not the solution for the overall effort, but it is a solution for that one agency, and they have a culture that accepts that. You've got other agencies where if you start to do too much innovation, if you will, in these arenas, you're going to get pushback internally. So it's got to be, again, these are complex problems with complex solutions, and one size does not fit all. It's as much as I would like to think that, I don't think that's the answer. Although, good, Josh, I could be proven wrong on that one. But I think there is something to that. So hopefully that's responsive to the question.
It's kind of building
help
on
me, Phil.
One of the common patterns of success that you certainly see exhibited more inside the DoD and the intelligence community is the executive leaders of those agencies taking personal responsibility for driving kind of workforce development such that they provide the air cover where their hiring teams feel okay about redefining some of the authorities. And I think it's that top-down leadership of making this a priority that then lets all of the other things to challenge some of the assumptions about the authorities get removed. And then similarly, Vicky, as you were hinting at, again, what you see in some of those agencies is much deeper relationships with on-campus recruiting. So, for example, the NSA have these centers for academic excellence, which drives not just research, but is mainly a vehicle for grabbing people in their freshman year and making sure that they apply, 4 years later. And then similarly, they're able to articulate a very clear mission that is attractive to people, even if they don't necessarily feel they're getting paid as well as they would in the private market. And I think those things come together quite well. But ultimately, it's the tone at the top of the heads of these agencies making hiring their priority, not just the lower levels of the organization.
Yeah, the Department of Defense typically will sponsor internships and a variety of things like that because they need those professionals. They vet them and they hire many of the interns. The one I think program that we highlight in the letter report itself is the civilian workforce for the Department of Defense. And specifically, there's a program within that that the Department of Defense is piloting at my old institution, which essentially is what they call classified ready employment workforce. You start with students at the sophomore level. They are read into programs with private sector, I might add, typically defense industry programs and projects that then allow them to not only get, while they're working on their degree, they do the internship projects, and when they graduate with a degree and a security clearance. That is enormously important. I mean, if you do security clearances at all, you know that it's going to take a year after you start that process, and so now you've just accelerated the access to talent that's not going to go elsewhere because they now are ready to go to work for the federal government, and that's a marvelous program. It's internship like, and the DoD does that not just for people wanting clearances, but people that they need for embellishing their workforce going into the future. Now, that's pretty innovative, pretty creative. They feel much more confident to do that than maybe some of the other agencies do. And so, again, one of those ideas that internships are important, and an agency can do an accelerated effort on that. And almost all those students, in fact, 100% of the students at NMSU have all been hired by the federal government. It's an important outcome, and it shows kind of the way, but not everybody's is as quietly as embracing that kind of approach.
Let's go to Kathy Wotecki, because we have to come to a vote pretty soon.
Oh,
yeah, great. Thank you. I'll try to make this quick, but the report did raise so many of the frustrations that I had when I was in the federal government trying to recruit for statistical and the science agencies within USDA. But the question that I wanted to ask is about the recommendation about the champion. And I didn't see this in the report. So could you talk about what you envision this person doing? And is this a short-term assignment? Is it like a 90 days, find out where the roadblocks are, make some recommendations?
Yeah, and I'm gonna let Phil expand upon this a little bit, because we had conversation about this, in our committee. I think for the most part, what you want is someone accountable for looking at the overall process within that agency. Does it make sense to employ the OPM, pilot type processes? Does it make sense to do that? For this agency, for the mission objectives, those are all important. I mean, the Department of State's going to have a very different approach to this than the Department of Commerce or DOD or DOE. And so it's in that context that what you're I know it's a little bit directive on the one hand. Name a person that's going to have that responsibility, who's going to ultimately report to the agency head, and that individual, without being so prescriptive as here's the duties of that person. That person's duties are really to help understand agency requirements and how innovation and other initiatives can be applied in that agency. Other initiatives that are being piloted, AI Surge, for instance, being one of those. How can that agency take full advantage of the opportunity space? Yeah, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like with any activity in any environment that we're all familiar with. If you want to make something happen, the executive leader of that agency needs to nominate somebody in the senior leadership team to go champion the thing. Some agencies may find that is the head of HR that should do that. Other agencies have found it quite effective that they need somebody on the broader leadership team that isn't the head of HR to partner with the head of HR to act as a catalyst for more significant change, to make sure that the departmental executives in an agency are viewing hiring and skills development and retention and all the things we call out in the letter as being a mission priority for them, not just for the HR department. And that's the notion of this champion, is just to really make sure that the agency is making this very clearly a strategic objective for everybody, not just the HR team.
Any more discussion? If not, I'd like to bring this letter report to a vote. Would all of those in favor indicate so? Does anyone have an objection? Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. Lisa and Eric, you have your hands up? No? Okay, good.
That was a mistake.
Okay, that was just a vote hand. Okay, very good. Excellent. So we've accepted your letter report. Congratulations, and thank you very much for the hard work on this. Now, we're going to take a lunch break, folks. We have a quick lunch break. And remember, you should log back in at 1:15 Eastern, and we'll start our session at 1:20. And thank you to the audience as well. See you shortly.